to the question that every graduate receives, which is, what are you doing now? It's like the bulletin says, I'm going to be heading down to Argentina next February, thereabouts, teaching English with the seminary and going to seminary too. Just kind of the fringe benefit of that. My degree I just got was in Spanish education, so I like languages, I like teaching, and have taught a pretty good variety of ages. I've done college age, elementary school, middle schoolers, preschoolers, which can kind of be the same thing depending on the day you and I've taught Sunday school a few times at my home church back in Tennessee. This is my first time to teach on a Sunday morning. I'm not a preacher, I'm a teacher. I figured as near as I can figure it out, I'm a fourth generation teacher. Generations 3 and 2. Are sitting in the back row. You guys get to feel what it's like to be in a classroom when I'm at the helm, I guess. Each one of you should have a Post-it note in front of you, so grab that. If you don't have anything to write with, my dad has a bunch of colored pencils back there. What you're going to do, flip the side with the horizontal end, and this is our warm-up as words. You're going to draw what comes to mind when you see the word that is on this piece of cardboard. You can talk, you can work with a neighbor, you're going to have 2 minutes. And when I say anything that comes to mind, I mean anything. It doesn't have to be Bible related, it can be from a movie, from a song. Whatever comes to mind when you think of this word. Again, you're going to have 2 minutes. Are there any questions? Excellent. Nobody ever asked questions at that point. I love it. So, here's the word. Way up? Yes. Strange or stranger? Strange or stranger? Everybody can either see or hear that. Just jot down what comes to mind. A little bit less than 2 minutes. Yeah, I will. About a little bit over a minute left. Like I said, you can drop it.
What'd you write, Grant?
Yeah, that's true. Write your job. Signature? That's from
30 seconds. Half a minute. All right, 10 seconds. The last strange thoughts out there. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Now is the time for shout-outs. One of the things that you wrote on your post-it, shout it out.
odd.
Odd, stranger, danger. What else?
Different.
Foreign, all right. Yeah, foreign, odd.
Someone I don't know.
Someone you don't know. Curious, danger.
Unusual.
Possible friend. Possible friend. All right, here's some other ways. Some of you guys mentioned these. Foreigner, alien, you might come across in some. Immigrant, migrant, outsider, other, different, unusual, sojourner, journeyer. One, Merriam-Webster defines it as one who is strange. Which, good job, Merriam-Webster. You said a lot without saying anything. One who is strange. And this word, the word stranger, has come to mean a lot for me, especially in the past 4 years. I've had the opportunity to be a foreigner to travel around a little bit. Last summer I got to go down to Chile and Argentina, probably going back to. Obviously going to school in Tennessee, traveling around that area of the country. And then about 2 New Years ago, I got to go to Egypt and Israel. So before we get into some of my own stories of strangers and such, I'd like to share with you one of mine that I've run across among the people I've met and the people I've read about from all sorts of places, but who have all have something to do with this word, strangers. So here goes, next slide. Sweet tea, strangers, and sometimes southern hospitality. All right. This story takes place in North Africa. Guy was born in North Africa during a time of genocide, or ethnic cleansing, basically trying to wipe out people of a particular race or group. Not sure what the politically correct term is, but born in Northern Africa during a time of genocide, miraculously survived. Most of his generation was wiped out. Miraculously survived, raised by a foster family. And from all we can tell, he had a pretty good childhood with his foster family. His foster family was pretty wealthy, powerful, influential, and so was brought up well enough. But one day, he was around the age of our high school graduates, and he sees some people fighting. One guy beating up another guy, so he intervenes, steps into the fight, ends up killing the guy who started the fight. And so tries to cover it up. Again, he has connections, he can do this. Covers it up, and then tries to break up another fight the next day. And the people who are fighting like, no, we don't want you to end up killing us too. And so the guy from North Africa realizes, oh, this is probably not good. And so he ends up leaving his foster family, fleeing the country, and going out to the middle of nowhere. And while he's out in the middle of nowhere, meets his wife at work, has a kid. And the name that he gives to his kid is kind of an unusual one. He names his son Gershom, which means, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Some of you guys are nodding, you recognize now who the story is about. If the baby's name is Gershom, the man I've just been telling his story is named Moses. And then a few verses later, after Moses is saying, all right, I am now a stranger in a very strange land, God is asking him to do stranger things. God is speaking to him from the midst of a burning bush. God is asking him to go up to his foster family, the pharaohs of Egypt, and demand that his people get let to go out and worship God and ultimately go to a new homeland. Things just go from strange to stranger, not just for Moses, but for many strangers in our midst. And when they get to their home, the people that Moses is leading, when they get their home, they're called to remember the strangers in their midst. Because God said, well, you were once strangers in Egypt, and that's why I'm commanding you to remember them. So we have the stranger Moses and his strange little baby Gershom. Sounds like a bad title for a fan fiction piece or a movie, I guess. The title of the movie, I Have Been a Stranger, or maybe just Stranger. So I can relate to Moses' claim that I have been a stranger in a strange place. I think we all can to some extent. When I moved to the Dalles and experienced my first day of 85 degree heat, it was definitely a stranger in a very strange land. When I started my first day of cherries and nobody could pronounce my name, I was a stranger in a very strange land. When I went to Cairo, Egypt, where this story took place, and was awoken at 5 a.m. by the call to prayer while you're still jet-lagged, you feel that you are definitely a stranger in a very strange land at that point. When I went to Mexico, we were fed chicken soup with the whole chicken in it. A stranger in a strange land. When I went farther south in South America, I realized that in a few minutes can mean anything from in 4 hours to tomorrow. And go all over the public transportation system looking for one person in a city of several million people, you are definitely a stranger in a strange land. Yet in all of my travels, I never felt more of a stranger in a strange land until I went to Cleveland, Tennessee, where I've been these past 4 years. Believe me, nothing says strange, flip to the next slide, like having a church, a pharmacy, and a fried chicken place on every corner, without fail. Confederate flag, proudly. Pretty strange. Let's see, and nothing quite says being strange in a strange land, like public high schoolers all wearing polo shirts and calling you ma'am. Kind of strange. Nothing says strange like no bike lanes and no recycling, and a dialect that gets thicker as you go up into the Appalachian Mountains. Yes, very strange. I went out one day with my friend Jessica, and she's like, we're going out to the mountains. Mountains, Mount Hood, Mount Rainier, Mount Atlas, mountains. We got out these little rolling hills like you see in the Willamette Valley, and thinking, mountains, what are the mountains? I'm not saying this out loud, fortunately. She parks the car, and I'm looking around, mountains, and she's like, we're here, we're in the mountains. Oh, wow. That's my definition of what a mountain is. Very strange. Let's see. When you go to a church for the first time and you get asked the 3 essential questions of the South, which is, who are you, where do you go to church, and how do you feel about the Tennessee Volunteers? That's pretty strange. When you have to explain that Oregon is not a part of Canada. Wow. When you go to a very Pentecostal school and go to the church on the corner and people are swinging their suit coats around in the air. Pretty strange. When you get on a flight after going to said Pentecostal school and accidentally convincing a pastor that you're not a Christian because you go to the Pentecostal school. It's really hard to get out of that one. But if somebody's convinced you're not Christian, it's not easy to get out of that. It's strange going to a restaurant and ordering tea, and instead of the warm, comforting beverage that you expect, you get something that looks and tastes a little bit more like iced maple syrup. Pretty strange. As Uncle Si would say, the South is a very strange place, Jack. But fortunately, the South, for all of its quirks and strangeness and weird weather and Cracker Barrels, the South has a solution for so much strangeness, which is kind of nice that they have it built into the culture. It's kind of an antidote, I guess, for so much strangeness. This is because the South, more than other areas of the U.S., has preserved the ancient Christian tradition of hospitality. I went to my first Sunday at my home church back there. I'd spent about 2 months thereabouts at different churches, different Sundays, because there's tons of them. Town of 40,000 is about 20,000 churches, it seems like at times. And so I'm finally here at my church, and it's about a little bit bigger than this. A little bit bigger than this. Considerably older than we are. The music was painfully amateur that particular Sunday. The sermon wasn't particularly memorable. It's not a word.
Word for us.
Okay.
Working it out.
But fortunately, none of these things But fortunately, none of these things are the heart of a church, which is good. It's not the worship, it's not the sermon, it's not the brick building with kind of a broken sign outside. It's, you learn that the way to a church's heart is through their stomach. And so two adults approached me after service and promptly invited me over to their house to have lunch with them. And after a few months of cafeteria food, I said, absolutely. And went over to their house, and so from that process, I became adopted into the Bo and Janet Bandy family, in the larger family of Queen Church of the Nazarene too. The Bandys are right about the middle of ages between my biological parents and my biological grandparents. They're right kind of in that middle gap. And so I've called them several things. I've called them my adopted grandparents or my godparents, but I'm really fortunate to already have a lot of those kind of figures in my life. And so finally I've ended up calling them a very kind of southern term for them, but because in the South you have two sets of grandparents. One of your grandparents you call Grandma and Grandpa, the other one you're generally going to call Mama and Papa. So if you ever hear me talking about my Mama Janet or my Papa Bo, that's who I'm talking about. They practice hospitality. In addition to getting a meal, a stranger like me can likely be made welcome and comfortable, invited to family reunions and camping trips, true story, given a place to stay or store my stuff over the summer, invited to teach Sunday school or play piano at church, and shared stories with and indoctrinated in the ways of SEC football. In other words, a stranger like me doesn't stay a stranger long at my Mama Janet's and Papa Bo's house. They don't. They become family. And in the hospitable hands of a place like that, a stranger becomes family, and a corner of the strange land is made into a welcoming home. As incredible as my Mama Janet and Papa Bo's Southern hospitality is, it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the rich tradition of Christian hospitality to strangers. Even from the time of Moses in the Old Testament, hospitality had a special meaning. Next slide. The stranger lives among you shall be like one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You're a stranger in a strange land. I am the Lord your God. Christine Cole, in her book Making Room, writes that for the people of Israel, understanding themselves as strangers and sojourners with God, with the responsibility to care for vulnerable strangers in their midst, was part of what it meant to be the people of God. It was precisely because God's people had experienced, like I did, what it meant to be a stranger, that they could welcome the stranger in their midst, and open their homes and hearts to the strangers in their new home. Their new home of Israel was nothing less than God himself, for he is their dwelling place throughout all generations. Psalm 90. In God we're strangers, but at home, and we can open our doors and our arms to all. With the incarnation, with God taking on human stuff, human flesh, Christ becomes a divine stranger and the ultimate outsider in our midst. Christ spends most of his earthly life in ministry essentially homeless, relying on the hospitality of others. And he asserts that he's very real and present among the least of these. And when we welcome and receive a stranger, we welcome Jesus, Christ himself. How this can be is a mystery. We don't know how it works. But we know it's true. Martin Luther, theologian, said, God himself is at home in our home, and he is fed at our house, at our table. Hospitality to strangers, or to the stranger, is more than a welcome. And here's where I get to be a little bit nerdy. The Greek word for hospitality is philoxenia. Thereabouts. I haven't taken these yet. Philoxenia, hospitality, is the word that we get in the New Testament for this. For xenia, we have stranger, like xenophobic. And then philo, or phileo, which we recognize as one of the kinds of love. But it's not the erotic love of eros, or it's not the duty love of storge, or it's not even the agape, full-encompassing, awesome love of God. This kind of love is the love that you share between siblings. This is the kind of love that makes you family. And so when we see hospitality here, we see it's not just a love for the stranger, but the kind of love for a stranger that makes them home, that makes them a part of the family. It doesn't require many resources. It does require a willingness to share what we have, whether that's food, time, money, or most importantly, love. As a proverb says it, where there's room in the heart, there's always room in the home. I would be limiting my story of Christian hospitality if I didn't include the many other examples of hospitality I've had, besides my Mama Joe and Papa Bo. From my friends Catherine and Morgan, who live in a rundown neighborhood and always have about a half dozen kids in their kitchen, to my family, who always have snacks aside, and to the lady who taught me how to play the piano with her Anne of Green Gables gatherings and bread. I have many front runners in the faith who show me great examples of what it means to be hospitable, what it means to love the strangers in our midst. Even the migrant families who made me late coming home because they wanted to make me food. And of course there are you guys. I think of Faye, Steve and Teresa, and all of you. And then there's me. I hadn't had much of a chance to practice hospitality. I got to be on the receiving end of it a lot, which is great. I hadn't had a chance to practice much of it myself until about a year-ish ago. I was doing an interpreting gig for an acquaintance of mine, another scholarship student. from Paraguay. I was going along, and it was around lunchtime, and we were at the Department of Human Services and interpreting and waiting for paperwork. And so we invariably talk about what you talk about at lunchtime, which is food. And so we get talking about food. And I'm like, oh man, I'm hungry because I hadn't eaten since 6:30 in the morning, and I thought that was a big deal. He's like, oh yeah, I'm hungry too. And I was like, kind of had to tease it out of him because he would never admit it. He hadn't eaten anything in 3 days. And it was one of those things that kind of took me aback. It's like, okay, I mean, I guess I could have put the pieces together. You're a scholarship student like me. You're from an extremely impoverished country. You probably barely has enough money for the plane tickets. And it just kind of caught me aback. And so from that point on, I never would have guessed it, but I kind of made myself responsible for him, make sure he had a meal every once in a while. Or every time I made food for a bunch of friends, I'd make sure he was one of the ones over there. When his girlfriend was able to fly in, I was able to be part of that surprise, so that was kind of fun. And so that was my trial run on hospitality. And so, yeah, and when I say trial, I do mean trial because I was learning how to cook at the same time. So he got some of, and also the many guests I've had at my house, they've gotten to taste my experiments, some more successful than others. But in the midst of all of this, I realized that there's a profound blessing when you host strangers. It's not, my place wasn't very big, but big enough. I spent a few times outside of my house too, going grocery shopping and sitting in parking lots with random people. Those are different stories. These are just the ones that happen at my house. I never realized before I hosted and had strangers over to my house that when you ask God to bless the food and the meals that you share, that the venison stew and a bowl of rice that normally feeds the 4 of us can feed 15 people in seconds. I never realized that. I never realized that sometimes strangers with full bellies turn into excellent musicians. Many bluegrass jams after dinner. And that some of them will even wash the dishes afterwards, which, as my mom will attest, is nothing says I care, and I care about you like washing the dishes. I never imagined the stories they'd share, or the prayers, or the creative movements, or the powerful insights that they'd share with me. I never expected to be homesick for them after I left. I never expected that being a host would be such a blessing. That's why the New Testament church among the Hebrews, look at the next slide. Next. But the New Testament church in Hebrews was instructed to don't forget to practice hospitality, because when you do, when you love the stranger and welcome him in, some people have entertained angels and not even realized that. That's incredible, right? While the idea of entertaining angels is pretty cool, they're not the only ones present when we host and when we love the strangers in our midst. In Matthew 25, Jesus describes the final judgment scene, more or less, separating humanity into kind of 2 camps. Like a herdsman would separate sheep from goats, is the metaphor Jesus used, or like an orchardist would separate coals from good fruit, or like a mom separates Legos from Cheerios. We get the idea. There's a separation going place. They're clearly distinct from the other ones. And so as the sorting is going through, he says to the ones who are on my right is your left, so on his right, your guys is right. So you on my right, you on my left. And those on his right, Jesus makes clear that they did all sorts of wonderful things for him. They fed him. They gave him drinks. They put clothes on him. They visited him. And the sheep on his right are really confused. When did we ever do that, Jesus? We never saw you. And Jesus says, well, I tell you the truth. When you did it to the least of these, it's the exact same thing as doing it to me. And so rather than read this passage to you guys, I'll do, it's kind of a call and response sort of thing. On the next slide, Landon. And after that. Okay, the part in bold, you guys are going to read. So the part that's in, the part that's in non, the part that's in regular print, I'll read. These are the words of Christ. And Christ will say to those on his right, come, you who are going to be coming into the kingdom that I have prepared for you from the beginning of the world, because I was hungry,
and we fed you,
I was thirsty,
and we gave you something to drink,
I was naked,
and we put clothes on you,
I was sick, and I was in prison.
and we took care of you and visited you,
I was a stranger,
and we welcomed you into our homes and our hearts.
and I tell you the truth,
Whatever you did for the least of our brothers and sisters,
you did for me. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? Christ is the ultimate stranger in our midst, and is the ultimate stranger in a very strange land from point. He is the guest at every table, the migrant in every orchard, the roommate in every dorm, the college kid in southeastern Tennessee, a guy named Moses with a baby named Gershon. He's present in the slums and on Snob Hill, on the east and west end, in Mexican, Samoan, tribal, white groups, those with bachelor degrees, and those who are high school dropouts. He is the stranger, so how will we welcome him? That's pretty much all I have to say. My family has heard this song a lot, and I'm sorry, you have to hear it one more time. This is my new favorite song. It's called Home by Phil Phillips. And so we get stuff set up for there.